Hello everyone, Gammon here. Sekiro is a game I've been looking forward to since before it had a name. I'm a huge fan of the Dark Souls series, and while I loved Dark Souls 3, I was really hoping Sekiro would provide a very different experience in the same way Bloodborne did. Thankfully, Sekiro is really distinct from Dark Souls, while still maintaining the core that made those games great. In Sekiro, you'll be playing as a ninja named Wolf, or later Sekiro, which means one-armed wolf. The game starts with a surprisingly long intro sequence that introduces all of the basic movement mechanics, such as hugging walls, sneaking, eavesdropping, jumping, climbing, etc. And it also introduces the bare bones of Sekiro's story, allowing you to understand who you are, who you serve, and what your motivation is. I personally love the way this sequence is handled, and I think Sekiro does a much better job of introducing new players to basic concepts like combat and movement than previous From Software games. Once the tutorial is complete, Wolf is given his prosthetic arm, and with it his final movement option, the grappling hook. All of these combine to give you a ton of options on how to progress through the game. For instance, in the first area you go to after you receive your new arm, you can either follow the road, fighting enemies all the while, or go to the high ground and stealthily pick enemies off, or even ignore them altogether and stealth your way to the next statue. While it is possible to go through the game without using its stealth elements, I wouldn't recommend it unless you really enjoy dying. Sekiro is very harsh, and the damage enemies do is high, meaning you're usually no more than 3 mistakes away from death, and the more enemies you fight at the same time, the higher the odds are of you making a mistake. Besides, stealth in this game is a blast. Finding a path through the map that allows you to quickly and efficiently clear it of enemies before fighting the remnants is really rewarding and satisfying. And these maps are designed around your new movement options. They're incredibly vertical, and you'll be spending a lot of time on rooftops and tree branches, looking down on enemy groups trying to find an opening to take them out as quickly as possible, or finding a way to surprise a mini-boss, allowing you to open the fight with a death blow. Enemies were also designed with stealth in mind, with some enemies having better eyesight and others having better hearing, like dogs for instance. Learning the strengths of each enemy type allows you to decide who to pick off first. For instance, if an archer and a spearman are looking at each other but are some distance away, you should always take the archer out first, since archers have much better eyesight than spearmen, and are more likely to see you kill the spearman than the spearman is of seeing you kill the archer. And this is probably a good time to start talking about the combat and enemy design of Sekiro. The combat is really unique. While enemies have vitality bars and it is possible to kill them by lowering their vitality to 0, this is a rare occurrence. Usually, when fighting an enemy, the way to beat them is not to attack their vitality, but their posture. Attacking enemies' vitality is usually done merely as a way to lower their posture regeneration. Posture is reduced in many ways: attacking the enemy when he's guarding, deflecting blows, jumping on enemies while they're doing a sweep attack, or the Mikiri counter. These are all great ways of reducing enemy posture. Out of these, the two that are most common is of course deflecting and attacking. A deflect is performed by blocking right before an enemy attack connects. I much prefer this to the Dark Souls parrying system, because attempting to deflect too early means you'll be in a guarded state, and take no damage when the attack hits, making deflection attempts a lot safer than parry attempts in Dark Souls. The game also gives you a much bigger deflection window than the Dark Souls parry window. The game is actually remarkably forgiving when it comes to deflections, and gives you all the tools you need to gain experience with it without dying. That is, so long as you don't fish. You see, Sekiro does something really smart. Because deflection is so powerful, you can actually just spam the guard button and be in a guarded state completely, while sometimes getting a deflection or two. However, every time you try to block, your deflection window narrows. So if you want to properly deflect, you're going to want to try to press the block button once for every enemy attack. So if you try to fish for deflections, you're usually just making it harder to succeed. The system encourages a very deliberate and very stylish form of fighting, with each button press being precise. All of these fights are accompanied with the sound of clashing steel, and they sound and feel great. In general, the sound design in this game, from the sound of swords clashing to the music, to even something as minute as the sound of hooves, are all done incredibly well. And all of this, everything, really immerses you in Sekiro's world. Actually, I'm gonna stop talking for a moment, just so that you can listen to how great this sounds. The way the fighting system in Sekiro works forces you to go in, and it will greatly punish passivity. Posture will regenerate if you stop attacking, and you must break the enemy's posture if you want to get the death blow. So constant aggression is necessary if you want to win. In this way, Sekiro has pretty much solved the Dark Souls problem of overly passive players hiding behind shields or using dodge rolls too much. However, sometimes you're gonna start a fight you can't win. Trust me, I've done it one too many times. And when you do, the new movement options are also great for running away. And running away is highly recommended. The way death is handled in Sekiro is very different from Dark Souls. In Dark Souls, you'll be losing all of your souls upon death, but you'll leave behind a bloodstain. And reaching that bloodstain will regain everything you've lost. In Sekiro, once you die, you can revive, but if you die a second time, you'll be losing half of all of the experience you gained since you got your last skill point, and half of all of your current gold. So, if you're carrying a large amount of gold, or you're very close to your next skill point, and you're now on your second life, it's really prudent to run away at full speed and rest at the last statue so you can get your second life back and safeguard yourself against losing progress. Don't worry, you're not being a coward, you're being a ninja. And to anyone who caught it, yes, you gain skill points in Sekiro, not levels, which you can then spend in different trees to gain special moves, passive skills, and a bunch of other cool stuff. This is a really awesome new system, and while you'll be getting your first 2 skill trees from the sculpture, 2 others are hidden around the world, rewarding exploration. The only major problem I have with the new system is that it's a bit lopsided. Some skills are so powerful that rushing them is nearly mandatory, while others are borderline useless. The other ways of improving your character is beads that you get by defeating mini-bosses. Again, another incentive to fight every mini-boss you see, no matter how difficult. The beads increase your vitality and posture. And memories. These are given to you by bosses and will increase your attack. And these mini-bosses and bosses are probably the best part of the game. While the gameplay in each level is fun, the mini-bosses are usually significantly tougher than the area you just had to beat to get to them, and beating them is always thrilling. And some of the bosses had me on the verge of losing my mind, making beating them a remarkably satisfying experience. I think overall, this game has the absolute best bosses of any From Software game I played, and that's saying a lot. No, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying every boss is great. They had two puzzle bosses which I wasn't the biggest fan of, though they were better than other puzzle bosses in From Software games, but some of these bosses were just terrific. And I suppose this will be a good time to talk about the difficulty. Yes, this game is difficult. It is really difficult. It was actually harder for me to learn than most Souls games, and I think it's because, well, this game kinda actively punishes your old instincts. You can sidestep a lot of attacks, but the enemies have much better tracking. So even if you sidestep the first attack, you're gonna get hit by the second and third. And the reason the tracking is so much better is so that you will get hit. You're not supposed to dodge attacks, you're supposed to deflect. Deflection is the name of the game. And more or less every boss encounter or even every enemy encounter can more or less be summed up as deflect good. Now, I know I said that deflection is remarkably easier than parrying, and it is, and that the deflection window is much wider, and that if you deflect a little too early, you're going to be in a guarded state. These are all true. However, deflecting is still quite difficult. It is this difficulty that makes the game fun. Pulling off deflections is always fun. Whether it's a large enemy and deflecting him causes him to suddenly face the wrong way, letting you hit him, or collapse, letting you hit him even more, or a smaller enemy where the deflections cause absurd posture damage, and sometimes even just opening them up to a death strike. Deflections are difficult to pull off, but when you do, they are satisfying, fun, and just really rewarding. And the reward is because they're difficult. The difficulty is, well, it's where the fun is. Without it, the game's combat system just wouldn't work because of how basic it is. This game isn't Devil May Cry 5. There isn't a large amount of buttons to be pressed. The amount of dexterity you need is actually quite low. Spamming many buttons at a fast pace is not necessary. In fact, the opposite is true. Mashing buttons in this game is heavily discouraged. You shouldn't mash the R1 button because, well, if you do, you're gonna have some problem blocking. You shouldn't mash the block button because if you do, you're reducing your parry window. This game is in fact the opposite of most of the games that are really inaccessible. It's remarkably accessible and it rewards slow, precise movement and slow, precise button presses. Now, admittedly, none of that made me not panic and mash like a retard. I fully admit it, I'm a retard, but that's not what the game teaches you. And when you learn that lesson and when you slow it down, you slow your pace down, and you press the right button at the right time, slowly and precisely, is when you're going to find success. And that's why I find the whole difficulty and accessibility argument against Sekiro kind of preposterous. This is a really, really accessible game. This is a game where the difficulty is the fun. If you remove it, what you're left with is a very threadbare system that just isn't going to be rewarding to anyone. Unless all you care about is getting a trophy, in which case, I don't know. You participated? Congrats. However, Sekiro is not a perfect game, and there are two things I'd like to elaborate on. The first is that while it is a fun game and in no way a short game, I personally put about 40 hours into my first playthrough. I'm not very good at these types of games and I like to explore, so odds are it'll be shorter for you. Either way, while not a short game, unlike other FromSoft games, there aren't any builds you can do. You can't fuck around with stats, you can't use different weapons, you'll always play as Wolf, you'll always use the same weapon, and while you can allocate different skills, eventually you're gonna have them all. Going for the game, doing multiple different builds, is not really a thing. The game does give you special modes, things like taking chip damage when you block, or ringing a special bell to make the game even more difficult. And New Game Plus enemies obviously have more damage and more health. But still, compared to other From Software games, the replayability is quite low. Now, the second and much bigger problem I had was grab attacks. While I don't mind grab attacks as a mechanic, the hitboxes for the grabs in this game are huge. They are absolute units. And sometimes you will be teleported across the screen to be grabbed by something you very, very clearly dodged. It is a really unfortunate blemish on what is otherwise mechanically a near perfect game, and I really hope it will get fixed in a future patch. However, these are kind of minor quibbles, and so far, Sekiro is up there with Devil May Cry 5 as one of my favorite games of 2019. This game is remarkably different from other From Software games. While it does obviously have similarities, it is refreshing and fun and makes me anticipate the future. I really am looking forward to see what the next From Software game will be, and how they'll again innovate on what is, in my opinion, a winning formula. So even if you didn't like the previous Dark Souls games, please give this game a try. It is different, and I've seen a lot of people who did not get into Dark Souls get into Sekiro. It is fast-paced, it is aggressive, it is delightful, and it will be an experience, no matter what. Anyway, that should be enough for now. Thanks for watching.